I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome some students who are kind enough to join us tonight. So often we talk about the future of California, and we've experienced a lot of California that your generation has not. And ultimately, this is your state, this is your country, and we are honored and glad that you're here tonight. Most of you know me. I'm passionate about California. I was born in this state. I've lived in quite a few parts of it. Our family has carved out its legacy here. We've raised families here, started businesses, ministries, and charities here. Our family enjoys its people, its vistas, and its many blessings. I identify with the spirit of California, and I very much want to see it succeed, now more than ever. But personally, I mark the date in 1980 as a point in time where I think California probably peaked for me. The sense of knowing your neighbors, of not being more than 2 to 3 people removed from almost anyone, of being able to get on the freeway and actually get somewhere in a reasonable amount of time, the California community, all that seems to have retreated since then, but we're not here to practice nostalgia. For those of us who are here and plan to stay here, we all try to get involved in our own different ways, to understand our culture and our state, and to make a difference to a place we all call home. That's why I believe we should do this, and I also believe whenever possible to do so in a bipartisan and civil way. Much of what has inspired our salons here in Malibu is the exploration and discussion about California and its future. I am glad and I'm honored that all of you are here tonight to be part of this conversation.
What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to start from the very top of this in terms of talking about the U.S. and the world. Obviously, that's of some concern, and then I'm going to draw it down to California and then to L.A. and have to say that I start more optimistic and become less optimistic as I make that progression, unfortunately. Mainly in part because I'm now finishing a project for the Manhattan Institute on the future of LA, and so I have some amazingly detailed numbers, which somehow we managed to have all these universities and think tanks here, and nobody seems to bother to crunch the right numbers. So I'll share those with you as best as my memory serves. Okay, the first thing and the most important long term is where is the U.S. going? I travel a lot around the world and spending more and more time abroad. And I still come back and I say, well, you know what, the U.S. actually has a pretty good hand to play. You have the demographics. The second major thing I think we have going for us, I think, is our natural resources. It's funny, when you read the press in the Northeast, particularly here in California, you think the country was running out of land. Well, as a friend of mine from Nebraska says, I always want to push them out the door somewhere, over the middle of Nebraska, and then they'll see how much land there really is. It's a big country. If you've ever driven across the country, it is big, and you can drive for hours. I once drove in North Dakota for on a winter night, 8 hours without seeing another car. This is a big place, and there are lots of places in the middle of the country which are growing, which would like to have more people there. So. But the more important thing is we have resources. We have, we're now the largest natural gas producer in the world. We also have the North America, if you include with Canada, and my wife, who couldn't make it tonight but is Canadian, I always have to include them. But the fact is that if you look at oil, North America is second to the Middle East in oil. We have coal, whether we want to use it or not is a different story. We have all sorts of natural resources. You go up to Alaska and there's just one thing after another. And of course, probably most important, we're the largest food producer in the world. And as countries like China and India and Vietnam begin to move up, the consumption of food goes up and they want better quality food. And the United States and Canada basically are the only places that are really going to be able to meet that demand. So we have enormous strategic advantages in our natural resources. And of course, the third thing is, this basic, more intangible thing, entrepreneurial spirit, and sort of an ability to absorb this diversity and continually reinvent the country, which is fairly unique in the world. So these are all great assets. Now, what are the challenges? The biggest challenge facing the country, in my mind, is going to be jobs. I'm amazed at the lack of attention to the issue of jobs in California. I read things, we're worried about, what people eat and Happy Meals and every sort of small thing that we're going to try to regulate. And meanwhile, we're not focused on the biggest issue of all, which is jobs. In the United States this decade, we need about 20 million jobs. And we're not remotely getting there. And I personally think that President Obama made an enormous mistake by not focusing on that issue when he came to office. He went on a bunch of other issues. And my explanation is that President Obama surrounded himself with tenured university professors, and they'd never lose their jobs. So actually, there are many bright Democrats like Bill Galston who've been saying all along, you got to focus on jobs, you got to focus on the economy. Whichever party addresses the issue of the middle class, jobs, infrastructure, and does it in a realistic way, I think is going to be in pretty good shape. Now, let me give you some numbers on California, because in a lot of ways, we may be facing the crisis America will face if we don't go in the right direction. If you take a look at California, we now, if you go by cost of living, we have 4 of the 10 highest metros with the highest percentages of poor people. Los Angeles, Monterey, Fresno, and San Francisco. If you put in the cost of living, the percentage of poor people is the highest in those 4 metro areas. If you take a look at a chart on poverty, per capita income, our per capita income in 1950 was about 25% above the national average. It's now about at 100% of national average. And if you figure in the cost of living, it's actually below the national average. So we have taken what was the richest and most blessed place in the richest and most blessed country, and we're managing to destroy it piece by piece. So this is clearly where we're headed. You take a look at education. At the age of 60, 65, we are 4th in the country in percentage of people with BAs. At age 35, we're at about 22. If you look at migration patterns, the migration out of California is now hugely bigger than the migration in. And this is a particular problem, and I'll get to LA, in the Los Angeles area. In other words, what we're doing is we're losing certain segments of our population. Generally speaking, middle class, young families, those are the ones who are leaving the most. Because they can't afford to live here, and there is no way to make a living in order to make up for the high cost of living. And so eventually they leave. So we now, the state of California is in a deficit in terms of migration with 45 of the 50 states. And I said, well, we're going to have these problems. We're losing our manufacturing base, we're losing our warehousing, we're losing our blue-collar jobs. The ports are going to be threatened, and I'll get into that when I get to LA. Don't you think we should do something? He said, oh no, we're so smart and creative, we're going to come up with all the high-tech stuff, and that's going to solve our problems. Well, here's a little statistic for you. There's something called STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, mathematics-related jobs. So we track this over time. And what we find is we find that the state of California in the last 10 years has had 1.7% growth in those jobs. The United States has had 5% growth, and the state of Texas has 13% growth. There are now whole segments of high tech in which Texas is larger than us. At the current rate, and I don't know if the current rate will continue, or anything like the current rate, Texas will be the largest high tech state within a decade. So if you're relying on high tech to get you there, it's not going to do anything. Plus, if you look at the nature of what's happening in high tech, we are moving further and further away from the old Silicon Valley, which I covered many years ago, the HPs, the Intels, which employed scientists, very high-end people, but also had large middle management and lots of people at the bottom, people working in production. All that's left is the very high end. So what Silicon Valley is a kind of Wall Street of a sort. It's a very skewed kind of income distribution. San Jose is actually in really bad shape. The Palo Alto, Menlo Park, that area does okay. But you know what? The impact on our society of a Facebook, a Google, a Twitter, relative to employment and creation of wealth for the middle and working classes is just completely different than what we had with HP. So California is, managing to mess up all its natural advantages. But if you think California is bad, then we'll go to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, in the numbers that we looked at, now has a rate of domestic outmigration greater than Detroit. Now maybe everyone's left Detroit, so but you know, what's amazing to me is I never thought when I was writing California Inc. that I would ever see a period of time in which the city of New York was consistently outperforming the Los Angeles County. We compare Los Angeles County with New York. If you go by industry, we are losing out on business and professional services. We're losing out on finance. We're losing out on manufacturing. I mean, it's really amazing. And there was a time when LA looked like it was going to be the leading economic engine in the United States. But what LA did, and I know this is true for Dick, it was true for me, you came to LA, you know, you were a schmuck in New York and you became somebody in LA. That was the way it worked. You came here because, you know, in New York they cared where you went to college, in St. Louis they cared where you went to high school, and in LA they asked what planet you were from. So, you know, there was an openness to this society and a tremendous dynamism. I mean, I distinctly remember, particularly the 1980s, and then a little bit again in the latter part of the 90s, a tremendous energy in Los Angeles, which I just don't see anymore. We know the problems with the schools. A huge issue is the port. You know, I travel a lot and I speak a lot, and a lot of the places I've spoken in are on the Gulf and in the Southeast. And they know that the Panama Canal is going to be widened. When the Panama Canal is widened, you're going to be able to ship goods from Asia directly to Houston, to Savannah, to Charleston, to Mobile, and every one of those cities is expanding their ports. We can't seem to, you know, get our act together on any of that. Can you turn it around? Well, you know, this gentleman did something like that. I remember 1992, 93, but here's the difference. In 92, 93, we really had things happen that caused the economy went down. The end of the Cold War, the LA riots, and then the earthquake, which ended up not being such a bad thing. But these things were sort of out of our control. What we are experiencing now is things that we're doing to ourselves. We have incredibly irresponsible city government. We have tremendous pensions, municipal debt, all those things. We are not investing in our infrastructure. We have a city council which is worried about, you know, every other country in the world, but not Los Angeles. We have the situation where you have a large population of people in LA who are now permanently unemployed. Our unemployment rate in the city of LA is 14%, in the county of LA is about 13%, one of the highest in the country. You know, we have a mayor who didn't even have an economic development guide till 5 years into his administration. And what was the strategy of our brilliant city leadership and the regional leadership? Well, we're going to build hip, cool condos downtown, and everybody's going to come to downtown LA. Well, downtown LA is about 200,000 jobs less than it had 20 years ago. And it's a massive subsidized sinkhole in which we are putting all this money. But I think that what you're seeing is the city is sort of turning against its very DNA. What is the nature of LA? LA is a city of neighborhoods. It is a decentralized city. We invented the form, which is now the predominant urban form in the world, which is multiple centers in a city. We have great neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are the thing that keeps the city alive. The fact is that the city's strength is in its people, in its neighborhoods, in its diverse industries, and no one is addressing it.